Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to part 14 of my pop EDM production series in Logic Pro 10. In the previous videos, we wrapped up edits, sound design, and vocal production on the verses. Now we're going to move on to the hook build-up section, which is essentially like your typical build-up or riser section of the song. In this video, we'll be getting some of the instruments put together, adding some transition samples and effects, as well as creating a pitch riser effect, with the ultimate goal of sort of building tension into the main drop, quote-unquote drop section of the song. Let's give this a listen and see what it sounds like as is.
Burning got me going good. I promise every night I love you like she never could. Tell me how you love me, tell me that you need me, tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Tell me how I'm fearless, tell me I'm your weakness. You got it bad, you got it bad, so bad, so bad.
Alright, now let's compare that to the finished reference track.
Burning got me going good. I promise every night I love you like she never could. Tell me how you love me, tell me that you need me, tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Tell me how I'm fearless, tell me I'm your weakness. You got it bad, you got it bad, so bad, so bad.
Alright, so we've got a lot of vocal production that needs to be done in addition to the instruments, but we'll focus on the vocals in the next video, so don't worry about that for now. Just one thing to keep in mind, don't get discouraged if what we do to the track now doesn't sound exactly like the reference track. We'll get there eventually, but right now the goal is just to get all of our musical ideas fleshed out and in place, not necessarily to fully mix them. That'll come later once we get the arrangement fully put together. Alright, so first let's mute out the vocals since we're not going to be messing with those in this video. And at measure 37, there is a 1 measure gap where there's some samples and things we're going to throw in here to create a transition, and we also want to move over some samples to build up to this transition, including the crash samples that we laid in earlier. So I'm just going to hold Option while I drag these over to duplicate them, and I want the tail end of them to align with measure 37 as well as measure 45. We're also going to move these over to the end of the second hook buildup section. So I'll hold Option and drag these over again. And also at the end of the second verse at measure 78. Also, this impact snare sample needs to go in a few places too. So I'll click on that and press Ctrl M to unmute the region. And I'm going to put it at the tail end of those reverse cymbal samples that we moved over at measure 37 and measure 78. These are the 1 measure gaps I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to pull down the volume of the impact snare quite a bit because I know it's going to be really, really loud if I don't, and we'll give that a listen.
You got me going, got me burning, got me going good. I promise every night I love you like she never could.
Cool, so far so good. Another sample that needs to be duplicated over here is the reverse piano sample that we created for the intro and the swell into the verses. This is going to go at the end of the hook buildup at measure 45. And by the way I'm making sure that all of the edits are keeping their relative position is I'm making sure to use the bar snap mode with snap regions to relative value selected. Alright, so let's also move the reverse piano over to the end of the second hook buildup section. Alright, let's give that a listen. It probably won't be super noticeable in the mix right now, but it's definitely supposed to be there. Alright, there's also a very ambient percussion hit that's supposed to be in the 1 measure gaps at measure 37 and 78. So I'll create a new track by clicking the plus sign or pressing Option Command N, and I'll create a new software instrument track. And I'll pull this up above the crash samples, and I'll rename it Verbeek Toms, because it's like a tom hit with a kick drum underneath it. So the instrument we're going to use for this is the drum kit designer. So I'll add a new instrument, go to drum kit designer, and then I'll load that in stereo. And then within the drum designer plugin window, we're going to go up to the preset menu and choose the Detroit Garage Kit. And actually, now that I think about it, the impact snare functions a lot like, or functions with the verbeek toms. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the impact snare up by the verbeek toms track. And what we need to do is right-click on the verbeek toms track and create a new empty MIDI region. So create empty MIDI region just by right-clicking. I'll double-click on that new MIDI region, and it'll open up the piano roll editor. Now, in the piano roll editor, we just need to insert 3 notes, 2 toms, and a kick drum. So you can see on the left side here in the piano roll, it tells us all of the instruments. We need to get down to about the C1 range here because we're going to add the kick drum. And we're also going to add the low tom on G here. And we're going to add the mid tom on A here. So C1, G1, and A1. So I'm going to use my pencil tool, and we are going to add in these notes. So A1, G1, and C1. I'm also going to drag over all 3 of these and pull the velocity all the way up to 127. There we go. So let's get out of the piano roll editor and give this a listen. All right, so this is pretty dry and boring right now. Let's add some reverb to it. Let's add Space Designer. And we are going to use Space Designer to create like a really reverby, distant tom ambient effect. So we're going to go under large spaces, halls, and we're going to choose large choir hall. And what we're going to do is pull the reverb signal pretty much all the way up and then pull the dry signal all the way down. So let's give that a listen. All right, so that's really cool, but the track is actually clipping a bit. So what I'm going to do to prevent this is add the gain plugin before Space Designer. So I'm going to go under Utility, Gain, Stereo, and I'm going to pull the gain down by about 9 dB or so. And that'll keep the signal that's going into Space Designer from being too loud. So the next thing we're going to do is actually duplicate this verbeek toms track, and we're going to create a little bit wider stereo effect. So we're going to duplicate this down to our new track. I'll rename this verbeek toms left and right. So you can probably see what we're going to do here is pan them left and right. So the left one will pan about 20 to the left, and then the right one will pan about 20 to the right. And what we're really going to do here is just go into Space Designer on the right channel, and we're going to keep all the same settings, but pull the sample rate of the reverb down to 1/2. So what that does is it gives us a much deeper reverb effect. So when we layer these 2 tracks together, we get a really, really cool stereo reverb distant ambient percussion effect. All right, so I'm going to drag over these and hold Option to duplicate this over to measure 78 as well before the second hook buildup section. I'm going to drag over all 4 of these clips and zoom in real close, because one thing we're going to do is I'm going to turn off my bar snap, because we actually want to nudge these clips slightly forward to compensate for the reverb pre-delay, because we pulled the dry signal all the way down, so we're just hearing the wet or reverb signal. If we don't do this, it'll sound slightly behind the beat. So I have some additional processing I want to add to these verbeek toms. So I'm going to open up the mixer by pressing X, and then I'm going to drag over both of these verbeek tom tracks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to group them together on to an aux track via a bus. So I'm going to change their output from stereo output to bus 6. So Logic automatically creates an aux track for us with bus 6 as the input, which I'll call verbeek toms. So let's solo out just the verbeek toms aux track, unsolo the impact snare, and see what this sounds like. So I really want this to sound bigger, but I don't want it to clip. So I'm going to add the compressor in stereo. I'm just going to use the Platinum digital circuit, turn the limiter on. I'll pull the threshold down by 0.5 dB, pull the ratio up to about 5:1, keep the threshold pretty much where it's at. I'll turn off the auto gain and pull up the makeup gain to get a bit more volume out of it. So we're getting a little more volume without clipping. Let's listen to this with everything in.
Every night I love you like she never could.
All right, cool. That sounds great. It really fills in that 1 bar gap and sort of creates a pause in the music before we get into the hook buildup. The next thing we need to worry about are the 2 guitar tracks in the hook buildup. Right now, they're just DI guitar. So let me show you what these sound like. So the first thing we need to do is add the Amp Designer plugin. So under Audio Effects, I'm going to go down to Amps and Pedals, go to Amp Designer, and this is going to add an amp sound, an amp emulation, but also add some distortion to it. So we're going to go under Distorted and go down to Modern Rock 1. We're just going to use the preset as is, and we'll pan the left guitar all the way to the left. Click on the right guitar. Let's do the same thing. We'll add Amp Designer. Add the Modern Rock preset under Distorted, Modern Rock 1. And then we'll do the same thing, but an opposite. We'll pan this all the way to the right. Now I want to add some bus processing to these guitars as well. So I'm going to drag over both of these tracks, change their output to a bus. So I'll change this from stereo out to bus 7, which I believe is the next available bus. Yep, bus 7. It'll automatically create an aux track for us, and I'll just call this guitars. And on this, I'm going to put a channel EQ. Remember, if you want, you can just double click on the EQ display up here, and it'll automatically create a channel EQ for you on the track. What we're going to do is scoop out some of the low end. So I'll go up to about 40 hertz on the low end, and then scoop out some of the high end as well. So I'll throw in my low pass filter at about 4100 hertz. And I'm also going to boost the mid-high range a little bit, so I'll boost around 1800 hertz. And I also want to boost the low end a little bit. So let's bump this up a bit. Pull this down. All right, so that's it for the EQ. I'm also going to add reverb to the guitar bus here. So I'm going to use Space Designer again. Also notice that Space Designer is shown under the recent plugins, one of the new updates to Logic 10.3. It saves your most recent plugins. The setting we're going to go with is under Large Spaces, Plate Reverbs, and it's down at the bottom, Shimmering Plate. We're just going to use the preset as is. So I pulled up the reverb level in Space Designer a bit, and I pulled down the actual aux channel level. Alright, the guitars are probably still a bit too loud, but I'll worry about that later in mixing. The guitars really aren't supposed to be, they're not really supposed to sound like guitars. They're more like a thickening layer for the bass and the chords. But for now, it's fine. We'll just tweak it a bit more when we get to mixing. All right, I got to thinking, and there's actually one more place that this impact snare sample needs to go. It's right at the tail end of the hook buildup, just as the snare riser sort of ends. Let's listen to that. Basically, it's right on the 4th beat of measure 45. So I'm going to change the snap mode from bar over to beat, and I'm gonna, I guess I can keep it on relative value, it doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna hold Option, drag the impact snare over to the 4th beat of measure 45, so when that snare riser ends, it ends on this hard impact snare. And again, the level's not perfectly right, but we'll worry about that later. I'm also gonna drag these verby toms over to the first bar of the drop who section, or she's saying who, ooh, ooh, that part. That we'll worry about that section in another video, but I'm going to put those there anyway. And we're going to do the same thing over here in the second hook buildup. We're going to pull the impact snare over to the 4th beat of the last bar of that phrase to accentuate the end of the snare riser, and also pull the verby toms over to the beginning of measure 95. All right, so that's that. The very last thing we need to do here is we need to create a pitch riser effect for our snare drum and our claps. So right now, the claps and the acoustic snare track sound like this. Pretty boring. Toward the end, they sort of speed up. And we want the pitch on those to rise up as they're sort of building up. It's a typical thing that's done in EDM music. What I'm going to do first is on the claps track, I'm actually going to split this down to another track. So I'm going to duplicate the claps track by clicking here. Duplicate the whole clip just by holding Option. Let's make sure it goes to the right place. A little off. There we go. I'm going to go to Snap Bar, and I'm going to pull out on the top claps track everything up to the drop section. And the same thing over here, everything up to the drop section. And then do the inverse on the bottom track. There we go. So we're just isolating the drop section from the hook section. Let me go in with snap mode off and just pull this reverb tail out. I don't want to lose the tail end of the snare just because I decided to snap to the grid. I'll do the same thing over here. I just don't want it to get cut off. There we go. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to listen to the bottom claps. I'm just going to call this claps with pitch because we're going to create a pitch riser effect for both this acoustic snare and the claps with pitch track. So the way we're going to do this together is we're going to group these together on an aux track. So I'm going to hit X to pull up the mixer. For both of these tracks, I'm going to change the output over to a bus. So instead of stereo out, I'll choose bus 8. You can see I've already chosen bus 8 there. That's really just because I went through this and I had something not work out for me. I meant to change that back, but yours will just say stereo out for both of them. So I'll choose bus 8 for both of these instead of stereo out. Scroll over to the right. Automatically creates an aux track for us on bus 8, just like it did before. And we're going to call this the pitch riser. Pitch riser. There we go. What I'm going to do is I want to make this track an automatable, editable track out in the arrange window. So you can either right click on it and say create track or hit Control T, or you can just click and turn on automation read and it'll automatically create a track in the arrange window for you. So that's pretty nifty. So here's our pitch riser track here. I'm going to pull that below this acoustic snare track. Solo that one as well. So you can see that both of these channels are now playing through the pitch riser track. There we go. So the first thing we're going to add to this is the pitch. It's the AU pitch plugin from Apple. It's one of the simplest plugins that Logic has. If you click on your audio effects insert, it's not one of the normal ones that's in a folder. It's down by audio units. And then you go over to Apple. And it's one of these. So we're going to choose AU pitch right here. And the plugin's pretty simple. What it does is it lets you affect the pitch of whatever's playing through the track with a few other controls that we're not going to mess with at all. The default setting is 0 cents, so it's playing at pitch, but you can bump this up or down by a number of cents. Now, a cent is basically 1/100th of a semitone. So if we bump this up 1200 cents, we're up 12 semitones, which is 1 octave, and that's what we're going to do. At the tail end of the build-up section, we're going to go from 0 to 1200 cents over a 2-bar period. So we have to do this with automation. So on the pitch riser aux track, we're going to hit A to turn on automation, change the automation parameter from volume over to AU pitch, and then go down to pitch. Now I'm going to make sure that my snap mode is on and is on bar, and I'm going to make sure that snap automation is on as well. So we'll make sure that's on. I just turned it off. There we go. I'm going to click right on measure 44, the second to last measure of this phrase, to create an automation point. You can see it says 0 cent. At measure 46, we're going to click again, and we're going to pull this up to 1200 cents. Now, it can be kind of hard to get it exactly at 1200 cents. So usually what I do is I get it really close, and then I hold control and pull up or down. And what it does is when you click and hold control, it basically fine-tunes the value as opposed to skipping values, which it does when you just click and drag. So this is a way you can sort of fine-tune your automation. There we go. So 1200 cents. I'm going to give this a couple bars. So let's give it like 3 bars up to measure 40. Go up to measure 50. And then we're going to pull this back down to 0 cents. So again, kind of get it close to 0 and then roll it up or down while holding control to fine tune the value. There we go. So let's hear what this sounds like now. And there you go. What we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste this over to the last 2 bars of the second hook buildup. So the way we do that is go up to our second edit tool, choose the automation select tool, drag over that with the automation select tool, hold option while dragging, and we can copy and paste this whole shape just to be in the last 2 bars of that buildup. And there we go. Now, in addition to that, we're going to add some reverb to our pitch riser. After the AU pitch plugin, we're going to add Space Designer. And the setting we're going to add is under medium spaces, gated reverbs, room reverse. I'm going to pull down the reverb amount just a touch, but this is essentially going to fill in. It's a really cool reverb effect for snares because it fills in the gap in between the snares and almost creates like a swell into each individual snare hit. Let's give this a listen. So that's what that does. I'm going to pull the effect down just a touch. It's a little bit too much. Cool, so that's our pitch riser effect. Let's listen to that with everything in now.
I promise every night I love you like she never could.
Cool, let's try that with the vocals in just to see what that sounds like. Just so we can kind of sort of gauge the stereo effects in the voice. I'm just going to pan the Vox Hook 1 over to the left and Vox Hook 2 over to the right. Just for now, we'll do a bunch of production on this in the next video, but for now, I'll just leave it like that.
I promise every night I love you like she never could. Tell me how you love me. Tell me that you need me. Tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Tell me how I'm fearless. Tell me I'm your weakness. You got it bad. You got it bad, so bad, so bad. I promise.
All right, and if you haven't caught this by now, the second hook build-up section is twice the length of the first one. So let's give this one a listen to.
You got me going, got me burning, got me going good. I promise every night I love you like she never could.
All right, there you go. So that's basically all of the synth ideas, the transitions, the effects, the pitch risers in the hook buildup section. In the next video, we'll go through the vocals in the hook buildup section, tune them, align them, create some harmonies, just like we did in the verse, and then we'll get over to the drop who section, as it's called. So I'd say within about 4 or 5 videos, I'd say we're done with the production of the song, and we can finally move on to mixing. So like I said earlier, don't get discouraged if the song doesn't sound exactly like the reference mix yet. We're really just getting all the ideas put in place and fleshing out the song, and then once the song is there, once the composition is in place and arranged, then we can go back and focus on mixing and enhancing some tracks, bus processing, automation, and whatnot. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.